My name is Ade Owolabi. I just want to share a little brief, where I call it analogy on marriage, that I believe will help. Um, Here it is. Marriage is God's property, and obedience is the rent you pay for tenancy. So this is how it works. Imagine marriage is a building, a beautiful edifice, a house actually. And because this house was not built or designed by any human being or government, this house of course belongs to God, right? So that means God is the landlord in this house. I'm sure that makes sense. Now the man and the wife, once they get married, they become the tenants in this house. So the man pays the dowry, is the head of the family, but it's not the boss because he doesn't own the house. The woman, the amazing woman of the house, the wife of this husband, also is a tenant. So you see, we have the man, a tenant, the wife, a tenant, and God, the sole exclusive landlord to this property. I'm sure that makes sense. Now, if this house does not belong to the man, neither does it belong to the woman, that means they have to pay some kind of rent, right? Good. And the rent they pay in this house or on this property, of course, is not pounds or dollars. That would have been cheap, right? But because this house belongs to a being called God, who is of course the landlord to this house, they pay rent to God, and the rent they pay is obedience to God. So when the man obeys God, he pays his rent. When the woman obeys God, she pays her rent. So what does that really mean? So the Bible tells us, husband, loves your wife like Christ loved the church, such that he gave his life for her. That's what we expect a man to do. So so long as a man commits to loving his wife, regardless of her flaws, imperfections, weaknesses, he pays his rent. And that's amazing. That's good for the house, right? And for the woman, the Bible does say, woman, honor or respect your husband as unto the Lord. So regardless of his flaws, blah, 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 as long as she commits to honoring her husband in obedience to the landlord, that's good for the house. She pays her rent, you see. But the amazing thing also about the rent they pay in this house is they don't pay their rent as one flesh. You know, the Bible says the man will leave his father, leave his mother, leaves his entire family, and cleaves to his woman, his wife, right? However, the fact that they bear the same name, Mr. and Mrs. whatever, does not mean that the rent of one covers the other, right? So the man pays his rent, the woman pays her rent. So it's possible in this house for one to be paying rent and the others be owing rent. Amazing, right? Let me extend it further. For those who are believers, who believe in God, who believe in what Christ did, and who believe in heaven and hell, that also makes it possible for a man perhaps to make heaven because he obeys God, he honors God. And for the woman who has chosen for whatever reason not to obey and honor God goes to hell, right? So the fact that she was married to a righteous man does not necessarily mean it's guaranteed that she makes heaven, right? And the same, you know, the other way, switch, right? So it's possible for the man to be owing rent and the woman to be paying rent, or the woman to be owing rent and the man paying rent, right? So you see, you decide your faith, right? You decide your faith. You cannot hang your entire life and destiny on your spouse, on your husband, on your wife, right? Beautiful. Now, another thing about this house is there is a virus that we must fight to keep away. If we don't do this, we put the entire house at risk. And if there are children involved, that's even worse, right? So let's backtrack a little bit. God and marriage is God's property, and obedience to God is the rent we pay for tenancy. God is the landlord, the man is a tenant, the woman is a tenant, they both pay their rent, and their rent is their obedience to the landlord. That makes sense. Now, what virus should we keep away from this house? This virus can corrupt the house, it can corrupt the sanity, the peace, the sustainability of this house, right? That virus, just one word, self. Selfishness is a virus to marriage. Now, I need to remind you that marriage by design is a selfless institution, such that anyone who comes into this house or on this property with selfish ambition, no matter how lofty or amazing, becomes a risk to the house. Does that make sense? Right. Another thing about this house is, because, okay, I forgot to say this at the beginning. So picture marriage as a beautiful house. One thing I didn't mention to you is that this house is made of glass. Glass, tinted glass, such that if you are living on the inside, meaning you're married, it's easy to see what's going on the outside. But if you are on the outside, meaning you are not married, you are not part of this, right, arrangement, you are not likely to be able to see what is going on the inside. So it's possible for a man to be abusing his wife, and it's not obvious to people on the outside. It's possible for a woman to be abusing her husband. It's not obvious to people on the outside, because all they see is how they dress, how they look, the children they have, the car they drive, the house they live in, the job, the business, right? And they in some cases envy them. Wow, I wish that was my house, I wish that was my car, I wish that was my husband, I wish that was my wife, right? Good. So in this house made of glass, one of the things we don't do is to throw stones, of course. Those who live in glass houses don't throw stones. Now, what does stone represent in this house? Blame as passion. It's your fault. You never do this. You always do that. Each time the man does that to his wife or the woman does that to her husband, they throw stones. Now, while this stone might not necessarily destroy the home, it leaves a crack. So every stone you throw leaves a crack on the property. And remember, this property does not belong to you, so you must be careful how you use it. If it was yours, well, treat it anyhow you want. If you're on a boat alone, you can ride upside down if you so wish. But if someone else is on that boat with you, you need to be careful how you row, right? Because now it's no longer all about you. The same applies in this house called marriage. It's not about you. One thing I want you to know is we don't get married for selfish reasons. We get married for kingdom agenda. At this point, I want to mention something I learned from Kingsley Okonkwo, amazing man. He did say, amazing picture. He said there are 3 kinds of marriages. Amazing. Number 1 kind of marriage is the traditional marriage. The key thing about this kind of marriage is that the man is favored at the expense of the woman. The man lives large, lives fat at the expense of the woman. The woman is supposed to serve her husband everything while the man lives how he wishes. That's the traditional marriage. The second kind of marriage is the contemporary marriage. In this case, the woman is the Lord. The man serves his wife all, and he doesn't have much say, right? Even though he's supposed to be the head, right? But the contemporary kind of marriage favors the woman. If you think about it, you'll be able to identify some societies where this is rampant, right? The man has no say. It favors the woman. It's all about the woman, right? And then the third kind of marriage, which is the one I'm really talking about, is the kingdom marriage, right? In kingdom marriage, the idea is not to favor the man because of the head of the marriage or to favor the woman because she's a woman. The idea is to favor God's agenda. So that brings me to a point, really. If God built this house, he must have built it for his own reason, right? So that brings me to the next point. Marriage does not belong to you, right? It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to God. So we come into marriage not to perform our ambition, but to fulfill the agenda, right, and the will of the owner. Have you ever thought about this? You don't even own yourself, right? So if you don't own yourself and you don't own marriage, why would you, who don't own yourself, come into an institution of marriage that you don't own and begin to call the shots, right? So I think I'm putting this out for you to have a rethink if you are married, and for you to really think about it if you are yet to be married, that this is how it goes. Marriage works when we understand how it works. How does marriage work? You must understand that marriage is a selfless institution where selfishness suffers, right? So if you are a selfish guy or a selfish lady, regardless of your age or status, you will suffer in marriage. You will suffer a lot in marriage, right? So if you want marriage to work for you, if you want marriage to deliver on what God says it will deliver, because marriage is a blessing, then you must be ready to commit to the systems and structures that God has put in place, right? So I think I'll share more on this in the next video. I hope this makes sense. Thank you for listening. Ade Owolabi here again. Thank you. Bye.